The day the screaming started, the sky over Harmony Creek, Nebraska turned the color of a day-old bruise. It wasn't the screaming of people. It was worse. It was the screaming of the world itself. But before that, there was the silence. A perfect, beautiful, manufactured silence, sold to us in a sleek white box by a company called Aura Tech. They called it the Harmony Band. It promised to end anxiety, to quiet the frantic buzzing noise in our heads. And it worked. God, it worked. For 3 peaceful weeks, Harmony Creek was a paradise of calm smiles and quiet contentment. We didn't know we were just clearing a space. We were tidying the room for a guest we never invited, a guest that had been sleeping in the basement of reality. We thought we were silencing our demons. We were actually ringing the dinner bell for a god. Jack Brody hated the silence. As a high school history teacher, his life was defined by noise. The clang of lockers, the chatter of teenagers, the drone of his own voice explaining the fall of Rome for the 40th time. Even his empty house had a sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards. It was the soundtrack of a lonely but normal life. Then came the Harmony Bands. His ex-wife Sarah had been the first to tell him about it. She'd shown up on his doorstep, her face glowing with a placidness he hadn't seen since before their marriage soured. "You have to try it, Jack," she'd said, holding out a smooth white bracelet. "It's like all the static in your head just dots." He'd politely refused. He was a man who believed in grappling with your own static, not outsourcing it to a tech company. Within a week, half the town was wearing them. His students were suddenly attentive, their usual fidgeting and whispering replaced by a serene focus. The checkout lady at the grocery store, normally a frazzled mess, smiled beatifically as she scanned his items. Fights in the schoolyard stopped. The town's perpetual drunk, old man Hemlock, was seen sitting on a park bench, sober and staring peacefully at the ducks. It was a miracle. A quiet, creeping miracle that made Jack's skin crawl. He felt like the last sane man in a town of blissful zombies. He saw Sarah having coffee with her new husband, Sheriff Miller. They both wore the bands. They weren't talking, just smiling at each other, their hands intertwined on the table. It was perfect. It was hideous. The weirdness began in small ways. One afternoon he saw a dozen people, all wearing bands, standing in the town square. They were all facing east, perfectly still, their heads cocked as if listening to something Jack couldn't hear. When he asked one of his students, a bright kid named Leo, what was going on, Leo just smiled. "System update," he said, his eyes a little too wide, a little too empty. "We're just sinking." The words sent a shiver down Jack's spine. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday. Jack was driving home from school when he saw Mrs. Gable, the town's resident eccentric, frantically waving at him from her porch. She was one of the few people he knew who didn't wear a band. Her yard was a chaotic jungle of gnomes and pink flamingos, a stark contrast to the town's newfound neatness. He pulled over. "They're listening, Mr. Brody," she hissed, her eyes wild with fear. "They're not quieting the noise, they're making room for a different kind. A hungry kind." He tried to calm her down, offering the usual platitudes, but as he drove away, her words stuck with him. He passed the town square again. This time, everyone was gone. But in the center of the square where they had been standing, the grass was dead. A perfect circle of brown, dead grass, as if something had sucked the life right out of it. That night, the power flickered. The lights in his house dimmed and buzzed, and a low hum vibrated through the floor. It wasn't coming from the refrigerator. It felt like it was coming from the earth itself. He looked out the window. A Across the street, his neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was standing in his yard. He was wearing his harmony band. He was staring up at the sky, his mouth slightly open. The sky was clear, full of stars. But Henderson was staring as if he saw something else entirely. Jack felt a primal fear, the kind that bypasses reason and goes straight to the gut. This wasn't a system update. This wasn't a miracle. It was a countdown. And he had no idea what would happen when it reached 0. The official explanation came the next morning. An email from Auratech sent to the entire town mailing list. Minor network disruption, it read. Some users may have experienced brief periods of desynchronization. Our engineers have resolved the issue. Thank you for being part of the Harmony family. The words were as smooth and sterile as the bands themselves. At school, nobody mentioned the strange gathering in the square or the dead grass. They just went about their day with that same unnerving calm. Jack tried to bring it up with his first period class. Did anyone notice anything? Odd yesterday evening? He asked. 25 placid faces stared back at him. It was Leo who answered, his voice a perfect monotone. Everything is in perfect harmony, Mr. Brody. The way he said it, like a line from a script, was more frightening than any outburst would have been. The silence in the classroom was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, watchful. After school, Jack went to the sheriff's office. He found Sheriff Miller leaning back in his chair, feet on his desk, a contented smile on his face. The white band was stark against the skin of his wrist. Jack, Miller said, his voice syrupy with calm. What can I do for you? Jack laid it all out. The gathering, the dead grass, Mrs. Gable's warning, the low hum. He felt like a madman, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush against the wall of Miller's peace. Miller listened patiently. When Jack was done, the sheriff took a slow, deep breath. You are stressed, Jack. I get it. The divorce, living alone, it gets to you. That's why you need this. He tapped his harmony band. It filters out the noise, lets you see what's real. There was no gathering. The town groundskeeper is just having trouble with a fungus. And old Mrs. Gable has been seeing conspiracies in her soup for 50 years. The hum, Dave. What about the hum? Jack insisted. Faulty transformer down at the substation. Power company's looking at it, Miller said dismissively. You are connecting dots that aren't there. You need to relax. He was patronizing, dismissive, and utterly convinced of his own rightness. Jack realized he wasn't talking to Dave Miller, the man he'd known for 20 years. He was talking to the band. The band was answering. He left the station, feeling more isolated than ever. He was the only one screaming in a town that had forgotten how. He drove past Mrs. Gable's house again. She was on her porch, rocking in her chair, a shotgun laid across her lap. She just nodded at him as he passed, a grim, knowing look in her eyes. That evening, Jack decided to do some research. He sat at his old desktop computer, the fan whirring noisily, and typed Auratech into the search bar. The company was new, barely a year old. Its CEO was a man named Sylvan Rhodes, a tech guru with a messianic complex, who talked about curing the disease of human consciousness. There were glowing articles, testimonials, and stock prices that shot straight up. But Jack dug deeper, past the polished corporate facade. He found forums, fringe websites, threads full of people like him, people who refused the band. They called themselves the Unplugged. They talked about the same things he was seeing, the blank stares, the strange synchronized behaviors, the moments of lost time. One user, screen name Cassandra22, had a chilling post. It's a neural pacifier. It smooths out the chaotic frequencies of the human brain. But what happens to all that energy? Where does all that mental noise go? You can't just delete it. It has to go somewhere. The post ended with a question that made Jack's blood run cold. What if our thoughts, our fears, our chaos were a shield? What if all that noise was keeping something out? He leaned back, the hum of his computer a comforting sound. The silence outside his window was not. He thought about the dead circle of grass in the town square. Not a fungus. It looked like something had been focused there. A lens. All the mental energy of 100 people focused on one spot. Where does the noise go? He looked out the window at the Henderson house again. The lights were off. But in the upstairs window, a faint rhythmic blue light pulsed. On, off, like a beacon or a heartbeat. He suddenly felt like he was living in a town full of sleeper agents, all waiting for a signal. And the company that held the trigger was telling everyone that everything was in perfect harmony. The first death happened on a Thursday. It wasn't violent. That was the most horrible part. Tom Riley, the town's beloved mailman, had worn his harmony band since day one. He claimed it made his rounds feel less like work and more like a gentle stroll. Jack saw him that morning, waving with his usual placid smile as he put a bundle of letters in the Hendersons' mailbox. An hour later, a crowd gathered at the intersection of Main and Elm. Jack pushed his way through, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Tom Riley's mail truck was parked perfectly by the curb. Tom himself was lying in the middle of the crosswalk. There wasn't a mark on him. His eyes were wide open, staring at the sky with a look of mild surprise. His harmony band gleamed in the morning sun. Sheriff Miller was already there, his face a mask of professional calm. "Looks like a massive aneurysm," he announced to the concerned onlookers. "Tragic, just tragic." But Jack saw the paramedic, a young man new to town, lean in and mutter something to Miller. Jack was close enough to hear it. "Sheriff," his heart just stopped, like a switch was flipped. "I've never seen anything like it." Miller shot the paramedic a sharp look and then addressed the crowd again. "Please disperse. Give the family some privacy." People nodded, their faces full of a shallow, fleeting sympathy, and walked away. No hysteria, no panic, just a calm acceptance. It was profoundly wrong. Jack found Leo sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook. He wasn't wearing his band today. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "You see it, don't you?" Jack said, sitting next to him. Leo didn't look up from his drawing. "My mom made me take mine off. She said I was talking in my sleep, but not with my voice." "What do you mean?" Leo finally looked at him, his eyes dark with a fear that felt real, not manufactured. "She recorded it. It was just this sound, a clicking, humming sound, like static. She got scared. Smashed the band with a hammer this morning." He flipped his notebook to a new page and began to draw, his pencil flying across the paper. It was a diagram of the harmony band's inner workings. He'd clearly looked it up. "It's not just a receiver, Mr. Brody," Leo said, his voice low and urgent. "It's a transceiver. It sends and receives. It's creating a mesh network, connecting all the wearer's brains." "To what?" Jack asked. "To the Aurotech servers, I guess." "That's what they say. But the signal, it's weird. It has this carrier wave, the peace frequency they advertise. But here's something else piggybacking on it. Something underneath, a subharmonic. I can't figure out what it is, but it's not random. It's a pattern." That night, the wrongness escalated. Jack was grading papers when a sound drifted through his open window. Laughter, but it was synchronized. He went to the window and looked out. A group of teenagers, all wearing bands, were walking down the middle of the street. They were all laughing in perfect unison, a single shared laugh, rising and falling at the exact same moment. It was the most soulless sound he had ever heard. Then they stopped. They all turned their heads in the same direction, toward the old abandoned radio tower on Miller's Ridge, just outside of town. They stood there for a full minute, silent and still, before continuing on their way as if nothing had happened. Jack felt a fresh wave of panic. He called the sheriff's office. A deputy answered, her voice calm and detached. The sheriff was busy. Was it an emergency? Jack didn't know what to say. A bunch of kids were laughing weirdly. It sounded insane. He hung up. He knew then that he and Leo and the crazy old lady with the shotgun were on their own. The town was lost. The authorities were compromised. He sat at his desk, the laughter still echoing in his mind. He looked at the picture of him and Sarah on his desk from happier times, their smiles genuine and messy real. He thought of Tom Riley lying in the street with a look of mild surprise, his life extinguished like a light bulb. He thought of the clicking, humming sound coming from Leo's mouth while he slept. It wasn't a system update. It wasn't a network. It was an infestation. A parasite that lived in the silence. And it was starting to learn how to use its new hosts. They're not suppressing the chaos, Jack said, pacing his living room. They're harvesting it. Leo was hunched over Jack's dining table, his laptop open, lines of code scrolling down the screen. He'd been at Jack's house for 2 days, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of mounting terror. His parents thought he was at a friend's house. It was safer that way. What do you mean harvesting? Leo asked, not looking up. Think about it, Jack said, stopping to look at the teenager. All that mental energy, the anxiety, the anger, the fear. Oratech claims their band quiets it. But energy can't be destroyed, right? It just changes form. What if the bands are siphoning it off, collecting it? Leo stopped typing. He pushed his glasses up his nose. Like a dam. They're building up a reservoir of raw, chaotic human thought. Exactly, but for what purpose? Jack went to the window. The town was quiet. Too quiet. It was the middle of the day, but there was no traffic, no kids playing, no dogs barking. Just the silent, placid movements of the connected, as Leo had started calling them. Mrs. Gable said the noise was a shield, Jack murmured. Maybe she was right. Maybe our messy, unpredictable minds create a kind of rusa, psychic static. A natural defense against something that needs order, that needs silence to get a foothold. Leo turned back to his laptop. I might have something. I've been trying to piggyback on the band's network. Just listen in. It's heavily encrypted, but here is a leakage. Tiny data packets being sent back to Oratech headquarters. They're not user diagnostics, they're mere different. He pointed to a string of alphanumeric characters on the screen. This looks like a coordinate system, a 3-dimensional one, and these numbers. He typed a few commands. They've been increasing exponentially over the last few weeks. What are they mapping? Jack asked, leaning over his shoulder. I don't know. It's not physical space. The z-axis was huge. The numbers are astronomical. It's like they're mapping something vast. Or trying to pinpoint a single location within something vast. A thought clicked in Jack's mind, cold and sharp. They're not mapping a what, they're mapping a where or a when. He thought about his history lessons about ancient cultures that believed in other planes of existence, dimensions layered on top of our own. He'd always taught it as mythology, as metaphor. Now he wasn't so sure. What if here is something else, Leo? Something that exists in the same space as us, but on a different frequency, a different dimension. Something that's always been there, sleeping. And Aura Tech isn't just quieting our minds, they're tuning them, turning every wearer into an antenna, all pointed at the same spot in wherever. The hum started again, louder this time. It wasn't just in the floor, it was in the air, in Jack's teeth. Leo clutched his head. I can hear it. The static. It's in my head. You are not wearing the band, Jack said, his heart hammering. It doesn't matter, Leo gasped. The network is so strong now, it's starting to affect everyone. It's creating a field. They've reached critical mass. Outside, a car horn blared, a long, sustained, desperate sound. It was followed by a sickening crunch of metal. Jack and Leo rushed to the window. Down the street, a pickup truck had swerved and crashed into a telephone pole. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was why. Every single connected person in sight, dozens of them on the sidewalks in their yards, had simultaneously stopped and taken one single synchronized step into the road. They hadn't looked. They hadn't flinched. They had just stepped. The driver had swerved to avoid them. They now stood in the street, motionless, all looking at the crashed truck with the same blank, incurious expressions. The driver, a tourist by the looks of his plates, stumbled out of the truck, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "What's wrong with you people?" he screamed, his voice shaking with fury and fear. "Are you crazy?" They didn't answer. They just watched him. Then, in perfect unison, they all turned their heads and looked directly at Jack's house. At his window they saw him. They saw them. A cold, alien intelligence looked out from 100 pairs of human eyes. The investigation was over. They had been discovered. The email from Auratech arrived at 8 p.m. It was sent to everyone. Jack and Leo read it over Leo's shoulder on the laptop screen. The unified stare of the connected still burned into their minds. System-wide harmony reboot, the subject line read. To enhance your experience and implement exciting new features, all Harmony bands will undergo a mandatory reboot and firmware update tonight at 9 p.m. For a seamless transition, please remain calm and receptive. The future is quiet. The future is together. It's a trap, Leo whispered, his face pale in the glow of the screen. They know people are getting suspicious. They know about us. This isn't a reboot. It's an activation. They're going from passive to active, Jack said, his mind racing. They've finished mapping. They've found what they were looking for. Now they're opening the door. He looked around his small, cluttered living room. It felt like the last bastion of chaos, of individuality, in a town that was about to be wiped clean. They had less than an hour. We need to warn people, Jack said, though he knew it was hopeless. Who? The people wearing the bands won't listen, and the few who aren't are either hiding or they think we're crazy. Mrs. Gable, Leo said. She'll listen. Jack grabbed his car keys. Stay here. Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone. I'll be back. He didn't want to leave the boy alone, but he didn't want to take him into whatever was coming either. Driving through Harmony Creek was like driving through a dream. The streets were empty now. The connected had all gone back inside their homes, waiting. The silence was absolute, a crushing weight. He pulled up to Mrs. Gable's house. The gnomes in her yard seemed to be staring at him with malevolent grins. The shotgun was no longer on her porch. He knocked on the door. Mrs. Gable, it's Jack Brody. The door creaked open a few inches, held by a chain. Her eye, wrinkled and sharp, peered out at him. They're turning it on, aren't they, Mr. Brody? She said, her voice raspy. Yes, at 9 o'clock. We think they're opening something." "I know," she said. "My grandmother used to talk about it. The wrong silence. The thin place." She said our noise, our shouting and crying and laughing, it keeps the walls of the world thick. But if you get too quiet, if everyone gets quiet all at once, the walls get thin, and things can hear us. Things that have been listening for a very, very long time. She unlatched the chain and opened the door. Her living room was filled with books and strange hand-drawn maps of the stars. "They're not calling a god, Mr. Brody. They're waking up a parasite, something that feeds on consciousness itself. It doesn't want to rule us. It wants to eat us." A clock on her mantel chimed. It was 8:55. "Tea here is no stopping it now," she said, a strange calm settling over her. "We can only try to survive it." As she spoke, a low hum began to vibrate through the house. It was the sound Jack had heard before, but 1,000 times stronger. It was a bass note that shook the foundations of the world. Jack looked at his watch. 9 p.m. Outside, a soft blue light began to glow in the windows of every house on the street. The reboot had begun. Then came the change. The hum deepened into a discordant, gut-wrenching chord. It was a sound that didn't belong in the physical world. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock the size of reality. And then a new sound, a voice. It wasn't coming from one place. It was coming from everywhere at once. It was in his head, in the air, in the rattling of the window panes. It was a chorus of every single person in Harmony Creek, wearing a band, all speaking at once. But the words were not human. They were a torrent of geometric, clicking guttural syllables that clawed at the sanity. Jack clamped his hands over his ears, but it did no good. The voice was inside him. He looked out the window. The sky was no longer black and bruised. It was tearing. Rifts of sickening, non-Euclidean color were splitting the darkness apart. The world was screaming. And through the open door of the Henderson house across the street, he saw Mr. Henderson step out. His eyes were glowing with that soft blue light. He walked to the center of his lawn and began to move his hands, not like a person, but like a machine, twisting the air into shapes that made Jack's eyes water and his brain ache. The silence was broken. The guests had arrived, and all of Harmony Creek was its welcoming party. The world outside Mrs. Gable's window had become a canvas for a lunatic artist. The sky writhed with impossible colors. Greens that felt sharp, purples that buzzed with malice. The laws of physics were fraying at the seams. Down the street, the Henderson's oak tree was bending at a 90-degree angle, its leaves shivering as if in a hurricane, though the air was deathly still. The connected were emerging from their homes. They moved with a terrifying fluid grace, their limbs bending in ways human joints weren't meant to. They were no longer people. They were puppets, their strings pulled by the screaming intelligence that now saturated the town. "Barricade the door," Mrs. Gable said, her voice steady despite the madness unfolding outside. Her fear had been replaced by a grim resolve. Jack, shaking, helped her shove a heavy oak bookcase in front of the door. The voice was still in his head, a constant stream of alien grammar that felt like sandpaper on his soul. "What are they doing?" he asked, peering through a crack in the curtains. The connected were gathering materials: lawn chairs, garbage cans, picket fences, car tires. They moved with silent, unnerving purpose. In the middle of the street, they began to build. It wasn't a structure that made sense. It was a sculpture of wrongness, a tangle of angles and curves that seemed to fold in on itself. It hurt to look at. "They're building an anchor," Mrs. Gable said from behind him. Something to hold the thin place open, to make the tear permanent. A police cruiser, lights flashing but no siren, came speeding down the street. It was Sheriff Miller. He swerved to avoid a group of connected who were dragging a child's swing, set into the growing monument of junk. The car screeched to a halt in front of Mrs. Gable's house. Miller practically fell out of the car. His harmony band snapped in two on the asphalt. His face was a mess of terror and confusion. "Jack, what's happening?" he yelled, scrambling for the porch. "My radio, my phone. It's just that." "That sound. Get inside," Jack yelled, pulling at the bookcase. They managed to move it just enough for Miller to squeeze through before shoving it back into place. Miller collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Sarah. My God, Sarah. She just stood up from the dinner table. Her eyes, they weren't her eyes. She walked outside. Didn't even look at me. He looked at Jack, his arrogance shattered, replaced by raw fear. "You were right. You were right about all of it." "Here is no time for that," Mrs. Gable snapped, handing him the shotgun. "We're the noise now, we're the chaos, we're what it hates." Outside, the thing they were building grew. It pulsed with an internal, sickly light, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. One of the connected, a woman Jack recognized as his son's third-grade teacher, picked up a garden gnome from Mrs. Gable's yard. She didn't smash it. She held it to her ear, listening intently, then placed it carefully onto the structure. She turned, and her glowing blue eyes fixed on the house. Then one by one, all the other connected turned. They stopped their work. They all faced the house. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the psychic screaming. They knew they were in here. The three of them. The unharmonized. The grit in the machine. A rock smashed through the living room window, showering the floor with glass. Then another. They weren't throwing them. The rocks were just tower-naviving, flying from the street through the window with unnatural velocity. "They're in my head," Miller stammered, holding his temples. "They're trying to get in." "Don't listen," Mrs. Gable commanded. "Sing a song, recite a poem. Think about your messiest memory, fill your head with your own noise." Jack's mind went blank with panic. Then an image surfaced. His son, age 5, covered in mud, laughing hysterically in the backyard. The memory was so vivid, so chaotic, so perfectly human. He clung to it like a life raft. The pressure in his skull lessened slightly. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the air. "Leo." He was calling Jack's phone. Jack fumbled for it, his hands shaking. "Mr. Brody, I am seeing it. The whole network lit up. It's not just a transceiver anymore, it's a projector. They're using the collective brainpower of the wearers to physically warp reality. We know, Leo. We're trapped at Mrs. Gable's house." "The school," Leo said, his voice frantic. "Get to the high school. The main server room is in a shielded basement. And the auditorium. It has its own independent power generator for the PA system. We can't quiet their signal, but maybe we can make our own." It was a sliver of a hope in an ocean of insanity. "We can't get out of here," Jack said, looking at the silent army gathering outside. "They have us surrounded." There was a pause on the line, then Leo's voice came back, grim. "You have to. That thing they're building in the street. It's almost finished." As he said it, a final piece was added to the top of the junk pile. A satellite dish ripped from a nearby roof. The moment it was in place, the entire structure flared with a blinding blue light. The psychic screaming in Jack's head stopped, and a new sound began. A deep, resonant hum that was no longer just a sound, but a physical vibration. The ground shook. The walls groaned. A voice, clear as a bell and cold as the void, spoke in perfect English inside every one of their minds. It wasn't the chorus of 1,000 voices. It was one voice. The voice of the thing itself. We are Avik. The voice was a physical blow. It echoed not in their ears, but in the marrow of their bones. It was a voice of ancient, crushing intelligence, utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a predator that had just realized its prey was conscious. "We have to move," Jack said, his own voice sounding thin and fragile. "Leo's right. The school is our only chance." Sheriff Miller, now just Dave, a terrified man with a shotgun, nodded numbly. "How? We step outside, they'll..." He didn't need to finish. They all knew what would happen. Mrs. Gable pointed to the back of the house. "My cellar. It has one of those old storm doors that leads out into the alley." They scrambled through her cluttered kitchen, the house groaning around them as if under immense pressure. The cellar was damp and smelled of earth and old jars of preserves. It was a pocket of the mundane in a world gone mad. Mrs. Gable led them to a heavy wooden door slanted against the far wall. With a combined effort, they heaved it open, revealing a set of concrete steps leading up into the writhing, bruised sky. "It'll hear our thoughts," Dave whispered, clutching the shotgun. "It will know where we are going." "Then don't think about it," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes glinting in the gloom. "Think about anything else. Your first car, the taste of bad coffee, the argument you had with your wife. Be human, be messy. It's our only camouflage." They crept up the stairs and peered out. The alley was empty, but the sounds were all around them. A scraping, dragging noise from one street. A rhythmic, metallic clang from another. The air was thick and smelled of ozone and burnt sugar. The school was 6 blocks away. 6 blocks through a town that had become the hunting ground of a cosmic horror. They moved in a half-crouch, sticking to the shadows, their hearts pounding a chaotic rhythm against the world's awful steady hum. Jack tried to fill his mind with noise. He recited the preamble to the Constitution. He listed the starting lineup of the 1985 Chicago Bears. He thought about the acrimonious details of his divorce. Anything to keep the cold, listening intelligence at bay. They made it 2 blocks before they saw them. A group of connected were methodically disassembling a picket fence, passing the wooden slats down a line with silent efficiency. Jack, Dave, and Mrs. Gable froze behind a hedge. The connected didn't seem to notice them. Their attention was focused on their task, their movements precise and economical. But as the survivors watched, one of them, a lanky teenager, stopped. He dropped the picket he was holding. His head tilted, a slow, unnatural movement. His glowing blue eyes swiveled and stared directly at the hedge. He had heard them, a stray thought, a spike of fear, a flicker of order in their mental chaos. It was enough. The teenager opened his mouth, and the voice of the cosmic entity issued from his throat, a localized, focused whisper that was louder than a shout. "There you are." Instantly, all the other connected in the street dropped what they were doing and turned towards them. They started to move, not running, but walking with a smooth, gliding motion that was terrifyingly fast. "Rah!" Dave yelled, shouldering the shotgun. He fired a blast at the closest figure. The buckshot tore through its chest, but the connected didn't slow down. It didn't even seem to notice. It just kept coming, blue light leaking from the wound. They sprinted down the street, the sound of gliding footsteps behind them. They were a block from the school when a figure stepped out from between 2 houses, blocking their path. It was Sarah, Dave's wife, Jack's ex-wife. Her face was serene, her eyes glowing with that same alien blue. "Dave," the entity said, using her voice, her mouth, "why do you struggle? It is so peaceful here. We are all together." Dave stopped dead, his face a canvas of horror and grief. "Sarah, she is with us now," the voice continued, soft and persuasive. "She is part of the grand harmony. You can be too. Just Rafra, be quiet." A half-dozen more connected were closing in from behind. They were trapped. "Dave, don't listen to it," Jack yelled, grabbing his arm. But Dave was mesmerized, his eyes locked on the thing that wore his wife's face. I can't leave her," he whispered. In that moment, Dave Miller, the man who had dismissed every warning, made his choice. He shoved Jack hard towards the school. "Go, get to the kid. Do it." Then he turned, raised the shotgun, and with a scream of pure, chaotic human rage, he charged directly at the thing that was his wife. The last thing Jack saw as he and Mrs. Gable scrambled towards the side entrance of the high school was Dave, a tiny furious speck of noise and defiance, being engulfed by a silent blue wave. They stumbled through the side door of Harmony Creek High and slammed it shut, the heavy metal bar clanging into place. The sounds from outside faded, replaced by the eerie, familiar silence of an empty school. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows down the hallway. The air was still and cold. For a moment it felt safe. Then a locker door down the hall slowly creaked open on its own. "It's in here too," Mrs. Gable breathed, her hand clutching her chest. "Anywhere there was a band, it left a residue, a connection." "Leo said the server room is shielded," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. He was running on adrenaline and the ghost of Dave Miller's sacrifice. "We have to get to the basement." They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing unnaturally in the vast emptiness. They passed the history classroom where Jack had stood, just days ago, trying to warn his placid, smiling students. The memory felt like it belonged to another man, in another lifetime. The door to the basement was a heavy steel fire door. It was locked. "Leo," Jack yelled, pounding on the metal. "Leo, it's us." "Name." For a terrifying second, there was no answer. Then a series of clicks as bolts were drawn back. The door swung inward, revealing Leo's pale, sweat-slicked face. "I thought you were them," he said, pulling them inside and shutting the door again. The basement was a small, windowless room, crammed with humming computer servers. The air was cool and smelled of electricity. The oppressive hum of the entity was fainter here, muffled by concrete and steel. Leo had a half-dozen laptops open, all displaying different streams of data. In the corner, a small camping stove was set up with a percolator of coffee. "Dave didn't make it," Jack said quietly. Leo's face fell, but he just nodded. There was no time for grief. "The entity, the horror, whatever it is, it's using the network as a nervous system," Leo explained, pointing to a screen showing a swirling, complex map of the town. "But it's more than that. It's using our technology to ground itself in our reality. The cell towers, the power grid, the Wi-Fi. It's building a nest. And the thing in the street is the heart of it," Mrs. Gable added. "The anchor?" "Exactly," Leo said. "We can't destroy the anchor. We'd never get close. But we might be able to disrupt the nervous system. Drown it in noise." He gestured to another laptop. "The school's PA system. It's old, but it's powerful. It's wired into every classroom, every hallway, and there are external speakers pointed at the football field. It runs on an independent generator right here, in this room." "So we broadcast something," Jack said. the desperate plan beginning to form. What? Static? No, Leo said, a flicker of excitement in his tired eyes. Not just static, that's its language. We need something else. Something complex, chaotic, and fundamentally human. Something it can't process, something that will overload the consciousness of its puppets and create feedback in the system. Mrs. Gable looked at Jack, her old eyes sharp. Your history lessons, Mr. Brody. What is the most human thing there is? Jack thought for a moment. He thought of war and peace, love and hate, creation and destruction. He thought of Dave's final defiant scream. Our stories, he said. Everything. All at once. The plan was insane. It was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot, scribbled on a napkin in the face of an apocalypse. Leo would work on hacking the PA system, rigging it to broadcast from his laptop. Jack and Mrs. Gable's job was to gather the ammunition. They ventured out of the server room into the school's library. It was a treasure trove of human noise. They grabbed everything they could find. Audiobooks of Shakespearean tragedies and silly children's stories. CDs from the music appreciation class. Everything from Beethoven to the Sex Pistols. Tapes of old political debates from the social studies archive. They piled it all near the server room door. A chaotic arsenal of poetry, music, history, and art. It was humanity's beautiful, messy, contradictory soul, collected on plastic and magnetic tape. It's not enough, Leo said, looking at the pile. We need more. We need it live. We need voices. Jack looked at the microphone Leo had hooked up to the PA system's main console. He knew what he had to do. Get it ready, he told Leo. When the time comes, I'll talk. Mrs. Gable will talk. We'll read from books. We'll shout. We'll sing off key. We'll be the noise. As Leo worked, a deep, rhythmic boom began to shake the school. Boom, boom, boom. It was slow, deliberate, and getting closer. It knows we're here, Mrs. Gable whispered, and it's coming for us. Jack looked at the steel door. It wouldn't hold forever. Their desperate, insane plan now had a deadline. The booming grew louder, vibrating up through the soles of their feet. It was the sound of something immense and powerful, trying to batter its way through the very foundations of the school. It's using resonance, Leo yelled over the noise, his fingers flying across his keyboard. It's matching the resonant frequency of the concrete to shake the building apart. How much time? Jack asked, his throat dry. Minutes, maybe, Leo said, not looking up. The system is almost ready. I am patching all the audio inputs into a single broadcast channel. Music, audiobooks, our live mic. It's going to be a complete mess. A beautiful mess, Mrs. Gable said, a strange, fierce smile on her face. She was holding a thick book of poetry. I am ready, Mr. Brody. The plan was simple. Once Leo gave the signal, they would unleash their sonic barrage. They would throw every piece of human culture they had at the entity, a cacophony designed to overwhelm the placid, unified consciousness of the connected. It was like trying to fight a tidal wave with a squirt gun, but it was the only gun they had. A large crack spider webbed across the ceiling of the server room. Dust rained down on them. Now, Leo. Do it now, Jack shouted. Leo slammed a final key. We're live, he screamed. A red light on the microphone console blinked on. Jack grabbed the mic, his hands slick with sweat. For a second, his mind was empty, a vacuum of pure terror. Then he thought of Dave Miller's face, of his students' empty eyes, of the beautiful bruised sky. He took a deep breath. This is for anyone who can still hear me. He began, his voice shaking but clear. My name is Jack Brody. I am a history teacher, and I am going to tell you a story. He started reciting the first thing that came to his mind. The Gettysburg Address, its powerful, ordered words a stark contrast to the madness outside. At the same time, Leo hit play. The furious, chaotic chords of a punk rock song blasted from one laptop. From another, an actor's voice began booming the opening lines of Hamlet. Mrs. Gable began to read a Walt Whitman poem, her reedy voice filled with passion. The sounds clashed and merged, a tidal wave of human expression pouring out of the PA system speakers into the hallways, out onto the football field and into the violated air of Harmony Creek. Outside, the booming stopped. Through the cracks in the walls, they could hear the broadcast echoing across the town. A glorious, defiant racket. For a moment, there was silence from their enemy. "Is it working?" Jack asked, his heart in his throat. Then came the answer. The psychic pressure on the building intensified tenfold. It wasn't a physical attack anymore. It was a direct mental assault. The voice of the entity filled their minds. No longer cold and articulate, but a furious, concentrated shriek of pure rage. It felt like a drill boring into his skull. Jack staggered, dropping the microphone. Leo cried out and clutched his head. The lights flickered wildly. The entity was focusing all its power on them, on the source of the noise. It was trying to crush their minds, to silence them with its sheer will. "Don't stop!" Mrs. Gable screamed, her face contorted in pain, but her eyes blazing. "It hates this. It proves we are not it. Sing, Mr. Brody, sing." Jack fell to his knees, the psychic shriek, threatening to tear him apart. He couldn't form a coherent thought. All he had was instinct, raw and primal. He opened his mouth and did the only thing he could. He howled. A long, wordless, messy cry of grief and fear and rage. It was the sound of a cornered animal. Leo, seeing Jack, started screaming too, a high-pitched yell of defiance. Mrs. Gable, still clutching her book, began to laugh, a wild, cackling laugh that was both insane and perfectly sane. The noise, their raw, unfiltered human chaos, pushed back against the entity's cold, ordered rage. It was a battle of wills fought in the space between sanity and oblivion. The server room door buckled inward, the metal groaning. Through the warped frame, they could see them. A dozen connected, their blue eyes burning with cold fire, their bodies moving with the entity's focused purpose. They were coming to silence the noise at its source. Jack, still on his knees, saw the face of the lanky teenager from the street. He saw the face of the checkout lady from the grocery store. He saw his neighbor, Mr. Henderson. They were almost to the door. It was over, but their broadcast of chaos was still blaring, and out in the town something was happening. The punk rock, the poetry, the presidential speeches, the raw human screams. It was all pouring into the minds of the thousands of puppets. For the first time, the entity's network was being flooded with something it couldn't control. A virus of pure humanity. The connected pressing on the door suddenly faltered. One of them, the checkout lady, put her hands to her head, a look of profound confusion on her face. The blue light in her eyes flickered, like a faulty connection. The entity's control was slipping. Its concentration was broken, torn between crushing the source and controlling its army. The psychic shriek in Jack's head lessened, fractured into 1,000 angry echoes. He saw his chance. He scrambled for the microphone, his mind clearing just enough. "It's working," he yelled into it, his voice raw. "Keep fighting. Don't let it think." The door burst open. The connected stumbled in, but they were no longer a unified force. They were confused, disoriented. Some were clutching their heads. Others were staring blankly at their own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. The anchor was losing its grip. The entity was losing its hold. The beautiful, horrible noise was winning. The moment the entity's control fractured, the world began to snap back into place. It was like watching a film run in reverse, fast and violent. The colors in the sky bled out, leaving the bruised purple, and then finally the familiar black of a Nebraska night. The air lost its foul, sugary smell. The impossible structure in the middle of the street collapsed in on itself with a deafening crash, becoming just a meaningless pile of junk again. Inside the server room, the connected who had broken down the door crumpled to the ground. They weren't dead, they were just terror. People again, they stirred, groaning, holding their heads, looking around with dazed, frightened eyes. The checkout lady looked at Jack, her own eyes, brown and human, filled with tears. What happened?" she whispered. The psychic shriek in Jack's head was gone. In its place was a final, fading whisper, a sliver of alien thought that was not a word, but a feeling. A feeling of immense, frustrated hatred and of withdrawal. It was retreating, pulling back through the tear in reality back into the silence it had come from. The noise had driven it away. Leo shut down the broadcast. The sudden silence was deafening, but it was a real silence this time. The silence of an exhausted, wounded town. Jack, Leo, and Mrs. Gable stood in the wreckage of the server room, breathing heavily, surrounded by the confused and weeping people who had, moments before, been their would-be executioners. The aftermath was quiet and strange. People woke up in their homes, in the streets, with gaps in their memory and a lingering headache. They remembered the harmony bands, the feeling of peace. Then Tav. Nothing. A blank space of a few hours. The official story, cobbled together by the few like Jack who remembered, was a mass hysteria event caused by a fault in the Aura-Tech devices. The corporation itself vanished overnight. Its websites went dark. Its offices were abandoned. Sylvan Roads was never seen again. They had poked the cosmic bear, and when it woke up and swiped at them, they had run away, leaving the cage door open. Harmony Creek tried to go back to normal. The junk sculpture was cleared away. The power was restored. People talked in hushed tones about the bad night. They tried to forget, but they couldn't. No one could look at a quiet street or a silent room in the same way again. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was menacing. It was the silence of something listening, waiting. Jack went back to teaching history, but his lessons had changed. He no longer taught about gods and monsters as myths, but as possibilities. He taught his students about the power of their own voices, their own messy, chaotic, beautiful thoughts. He, Leo, and Mrs. Gable became an unlikely trio, the town's quiet guardians. They watched the sky. They listened to the silence. They knew the truth. The entity wasn't defeated. It had just been repelled. It had learned about humanity, about its noise and its chaos. And humanity had learned about it. It knew there was something vast and hungry sleeping just behind the thin wall of reality. One evening, months later, Jack was sitting on his porch. The town was quiet. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. It was a perfect, peaceful night. But he couldn't relax. He kept his radio on, playing music softly, a small pocket of noise in the vast quiet. He knew the entity was still out there, in the infinite silence between the stars, and it was patient. It had waited for eons. It could wait again. It was listening for the moment when humanity would once again crave a perfect, manufactured peace. It was waiting for them to lower their shield, to quiet their minds, to once again tidy the room and invite it back in. The silence returned to Harmony Creek, but it was no longer an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was watching.